Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hello everyone, welcome to the Play Therapy Circle podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Happy Friday, you guys. Happy podcast launch day. We are doing things a little differently today. I am recording this on the day we're launching the episode because we've had some tech issues, you guys, this week. So our first encounter with tech issues. So it is very early today. If I sound any different, that's because I've just woken up and we are getting into it and doing this podcast because we want to get it out to you guys today. We are going to dive in. I hope that you have had a wonderful week. I can't believe that it's another week and it's another episode. I am so excited for the weekend, and I hope for anyone listening that wherever this reaches you, you are also having a lovely week. That is so important. I am very excited about this episode today because it is definitely part of the nuts and bolts of play therapy practice, and especially child-centered play therapy practice, when we talk about the topic of stages in child-centered play therapy. So I am really mindful of the fact that for beginning play therapists especially, having a tool to be able to communicate to parents, to be able to explain progress in a way that protects confidentiality is so helpful when it comes to stages of play. But I'm also really mindful of the fact that children don't progress in a linear manner in child-centered play therapy. So even for us as seasoned play therapists, we understand the stages of play, but it's always good to have a refresher because this can be a part of our practice that can really help us to ground us in our approach, give us that confidence in what we're doing, especially if we're feeling stuck, and really help legitimize and quantify the work that we're doing in a very child-centered, child-led, humanistic form to counseling, right? So this is why we do what we do, and especially when it comes to the stages. So today I want to cover what each of those stages are. And when I talk that through, I want to mention, I guess, what to look out for and some of the pitfalls that we obviously can sometimes happen. So making sure that we are understanding how to assess these stages is really helpful as well in our work. So let's, without any further ado, get into it. So we know that stages, and I want to preface this conversation by saying very much with my framework for practice in child-centered play therapy, I am going to lean into the Nordling and Cochrane model of exploratory, aggressive, regressive, and mastery. So I just want to caveat that because I know there are variations out there. So please use what works for you. But just to clarify, that's the one I'm going to talk about today. But I think one of the most important things, as I said earlier, is the understanding that stages in play therapy are not linear. So kids are going to bounce in between each of those stages. But like I said, it does help us to give us a scaling tool, a way or a concept to express to parents kids how much progress has happened in play therapy, and to give them, as much as us, that reassurance when it feels like we're stuck. I think that's something even for experienced play therapists you would know well when you have had a client that you have been doing 10, 15, 20 sessions or more of the same type of play and really feeling a little bit like it's Groundhog Day. So the way that we look at these stages is very much to take more of a helicopter view, to kind of pull back and look holistically across that continuum of sessions to have an understanding of where kids are traveling in their work. So it does give us that reassurance as well as the parents. It is definitely something where children will move back and forth. I often explain to supervisees that you will often find progress impacted by what is happening outside of play therapy. So when we are seeing changes like for foster kids, a change in placement, a death in the family, introduction of family contact, just changes outside of play therapy that are significant for the child, moving schools, whatever that looks like, it will no doubt have an impact on where the kids are traveling in their play therapy work in those stages. So having an awareness of that and being able to explain that to parents is really good. Okay, let's get into the different stages. So like I said, I lean into the Nordling and Cochrane model. So the first stage we talk about is the exploratory stage. So this is definitely, when I describe it in explaining this concept, I like to think of this stage as more around the child exploring the room, getting to know the toys, getting to understand us and the role that we play in that therapy process, because a lot of children come from other experiences of therapy where the therapist has asked questions or been more directive. So there is definitely a shift, and sometimes I notice it very subtly or very overtly where the child is, oh, you're not going to ask me questions. Okay. So there is literally kind of this light bulb moment, I think, for some of our kids, not all, but some of them, where they realize that therapy looks very different in a child-centered play therapy playroom. So they're definitely exploring the room. It often can be described as, I guess, cautious play, where they are testing limits. So they are watching to see our reaction to things, trying to understand what they can and can't do. And there's not necessarily a lot of engagement with the therapist or much kind of eye contact, verbal communication with us. And that's okay. For us as play therapists, we are definitely helping to convey and support the sense of safety in the room, consistency in the room, and we are very much leaning into our tenets of CCPT of congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard. So it's very much the skills of tracking. We might use some ACT limit setting that we've talked about in a previous episode, but I often think that when I'm observing exploratory sessions, there's sometimes an absence of that real intense emotional expression or intense content. That's another way of describing it. So it really is about them exploring the room and understanding the relationship. So we're doing a lot of those tracking reflections, like you're just exploring the room, you're just getting to know the space, you're just understanding how this works. All of those reflections are really helpful to essentially establish that relationship with the client. That's the purpose really of that exploratory stage, for them to feel that sense of safety to move into the second stage. What are some of the pitfalls that we can encounter in the first stage? It can be related to feeling a sense of the child not engaging with us and feeling like maybe this isn't going to work, or feeling that quietness or lack of verbal communication or verbal interaction with us is resistance or incompatibility with child-centered play therapy, right? And it's very important that we are staying true to the modality, trusting us, trusting the process, trusting the child, that every child is going to have a different amount of sessions that takes them to move through these stages. That's really super important, guys. And I really want to emphasize, if you are struggling with this at the moment or really feeling like a child is stuck, to go back to our tenets and recognize how this approach works and this modality works when it's at the pace of the child. And so those number of sessions don't really exist in a common sense. So when I'm doing an initial consult, which we're going to talk about in future sessions, but when I do an initial consult, I very explicitly say, I'm not going to put a number to this because I don't want to set myself up to fail or the child up to fail in that process. So we really do espouse 2-hour modality with that. So if we were, and being a humanistic Carl practitioner to my core, this is even hard for me to resist. But if we were to put a number to it, generally speaking, it may be, say, 2 or 3 sessions that we would expect a neurotypical child without a trauma history and without all of these other presenting issues to be able to start their therapy work. So that is where we begin our journey. And so looking at that exploratory stage is the first part. When children have established that relationship, they then move into the second stage of play, which is the aggressive stage. So what does the aggressive stage look like? I like to again explain it across that continuum to say that once kids have established that sense of safety and the beginnings of a relationship with us, they immediately go into that second stage to test the negative aspects of self. So what do I mean by that? What often happens once they have understood how play therapy works is they then want to test whether we are somebody that is going to stay with them and stick with them and not reject them. So they try to show us all of these negative sense of self, maladaptive coping mechanisms, ways of engaging that are not socially acceptable or healthy, to see our reaction, see what our response will be, and see whether we are going to stay the course and be with them. In the grand scheme of things, which I find incredible with kids, and it's why I love child-centered play therapy so much, is the fact that regardless of the child's background, regardless of where they're at, regardless of their presenting issues, at their core, kids have this innate drive towards that self-actualization principle of moving towards being able to resolve their issues or to see themselves ultimately at their core as good. And so all children tend to move through this same process of building this relationship and then really testing that therapeutic alliance to then be able to move into that third stage where they are then able to really become vulnerable and talk about those kind of core issues that they're struggling with. So it's incredible to be witness to that. It's such a privilege and an honor as a child-centered play therapist to watch children in real time move through these stages. But this second stage can be, I think, in my own reflections of kind of the last 10 years and those teachers that I've connected with, I do find that that second stage is probably the toughest for me. And the reason I say that is because as a play therapist, what we need to do is be able to stay calm, congruent, consistent, and use lots of limits, because that is going to be tested in the second stage of play. So that aggressive stage really comes to a lot of that boundary pushing, defiance, limit testing, very provocative play, really trying to get that response from us. So it's very important, again, in this approach that we are, as I said, leaning into that, understanding that we trust the child, we trust us and trust the process, and really grounding ourselves in the skills that we have. So using reflecting feelings, using that limit setting, that ACT model, helps us to have some tools in our toolkit to be able to respond and navigate it with the child. So using lots of that, reflecting feelings, communicating the limit, and targeting the alternative behavior is a lot of the language that we're using, along with reflecting feelings to let the child know we understand that they are showing us some really tough stuff right now, and that I hear you, I see you, I understand, and I care, as Gary Landreth would say. So some of the pitfalls we can fall into in this second stage often relates to taking some of those behaviors personally, overreacting or overcorrecting some of those behaviors. So really getting and accessing clinical supervision is so important during this time to really return yourself to the modality and remove yourself, I guess, from that personal aspect of the play to understand. And the way that I sometimes do that as well really understanding, I guess, that conscious and unconscious mind and some of that play we're observing in real time is to view it from the lens that what they are showing us is often what they understand the world is like and what they understand relationships are like. So oftentimes kids will show us those negative aspects of self, say if they've been exposed to domestic violence and they understand that how to engage with another is to put people down or to control the relationship or to yell, or all of those things that they have observed in real time and taken on board and not necessarily understood that it's not necessarily healthy or socially appropriate to do. So we get to see that in real time and we get to role model what an appropriate responses look like and how to support them appropriately. So we get this beautiful window of opportunity to help with that healing and reparation. So it is such a privilege and an honor. The third stage we move into then is the regressive stage. So like I was saying before, it's very vulnerable, connected attachment work in this third stage. So the way kids do it is obviously testing that relationship in the second stage to make sure we are somebody solid, that's not going to give up on them, that's going to show up every week for those sessions and be consistent. And then they move into that third stage where they say, okay, I can see that you're somebody I can trust. Let me show you into my world. And I find that so incredibly powerful. And so I don't necessarily find the third stage physically taxing for me. I find it more emotionally taxing. And what I mean by that is that the content of the play shifts into more symbolic work, and it can be very raw and vulnerable and important to the child's journey. And so being able to, again, take care of us outside of play therapy, whether that's personal therapy or clinical supervision, to be able to stay present and authentic and accepting of the child when they show us this really important material in the third stage. So it's lots of theme work around nurturing, care, connection, good versus evil, safety and security, fears and anxiety, lots of those things we see in the third stage. So what does it mean for us and what are we required to do as child-centered play therapists? Because we're talking about attachment work, it requires deep attunement. And so that requires us to be present and be able to lean into our approach at a deeper level to be able to really establish that connection with the child so they feel comfortable to open up and be vulnerable. So we're doing a lot of reflecting feelings again in this third stage and lots of making meaning statements to really deepen that work and help the child to know that we see what they're showing us. So what can be some of the pitfalls in this third stage? It can definitely be around interrupting some of that symbolic play, say with questions, because at this third stage, there's lots of that ambiguity. It makes sense to the child, but it sometimes doesn't make sense for us. And so making sure that we are sitting in the uncomfortable, sitting in the silences, accepting and being comfortable with the silences as a child-centered play therapist is going to be super, super important. So again, if that is a struggle for you, navigating that with your supervisor in clinical supervision is so helpful in this space. So then we move into the final stage, which is mastery, what we call mastery in that fourth stage. And it definitely shifts again in the content. So in the third stage, what I forgot to mention was what we see is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes an absence of aggression. So when we are looking at these different stages, that first stage is often exploratory in nature. So we're not seeing deep therapeutic content in the first stage of play. We move into that aggressive stage where it's lots of more of that physical aggression, that power and control in terms of themes. When we move into that third stage, I often say that it's almost like that absence of aggression and it's really that attachment, deep attunement work. In the final stage, we sort of look at it similar to the beginning, that there is then that move away from that intense therapeutic content. There's an absence again of that as we move into transitioning out of play therapy. So we're looking at increased relational capacity, talking about endings, showing indicators in their play that they are moving to mastery and that they are moving to the end of the therapeutic work, mastery themes, all of that good work that we see at the end. And again, what I preface this by saying is we are looking at the continuum of that therapeutic intervention, right? So we would not expect a child at the third session to be in mastery. But if we are looking at session 45 or beyond, and every child is different, so I hate doing numbers, but if we're looking at way down the track, a year from now, we can have more confidence in saying this child is definitely not still in the exploratory stage. They have definitely moved through a lot of work, and we can now start to look at, is this mastery? So what are we doing as play therapists? Again, we're still doing a lot of reflecting feelings and maybe at times that making meaning statements, but we wouldn't expect a lot of limit setting or some of those other skills in child-centered play therapy. So we are, in a sense, recognizing that the child is coming to an end. We're working closely with parents and caregivers to have a process to help them to exit, but we are preparing them potentially for the end of their therapy journey, reflecting on that growth and celebrating that progress along the way. So it is very important in terms of pitfalls that we are avoiding the ending because of our own discomfort or our own resistance, right? Because we as play therapists have been through a journey of growth alongside the child. That is what I love. I mean, again, I love so many aspects of child-centered play therapy, guys, but that is one of them where I love that I am a better person for having connected with that child. There is something that I carry in terms of that journey that will enhance my practice, that will deepen my work, that will make me a better person as well. So how cool is that? So we may have some resistance if we're not ready to say goodbye as well. So again, seeking that clinical supervision, getting that external kind of viewpoint to help give us some clarity is very helpful there too. A very quick, guys, overview of the stages of play. But what I want to do is just summarize, I guess, some of what we've talked about today. So definitely what can happen is that children will transition in and out of these different stages. And certainly it will be often impacted by stress or changes outside of play therapy. So they're not going to go in a linear manner. And it certainly does give us that framework to be able to provide feedback to parents whilst still being able to maintain that therapeutic alliance and confidentiality, which is really important. It really does help us as well to maintain consistency in the playroom, to have confidence in our approach and not to rush the process. That is definitely something, especially for our beginning play therapists, that I know can be really tough if we don't have, and I like to liken it to a catalogue of experiences of all of the teachers that I've encountered in my playrooms. In the back of my mind, I've got all of these beautiful children who have shown me what play therapy is all about and how play therapy looks. And so if you don't have that, it can cause that anxiety and that doubt for yourself that we are stuck in this, and potentially in your relationship in the work with a particular client that you don't feel like you're making progress. So it definitely helps us to stop and pause and not necessarily feel like we have to rush the process because we've got this framework to follow. And sometimes I guess it's helpful to normalize that regression when we do see that bouncing between stages as well. So what I want to express in talking about these stages is it's definitely a guide, but we don't live by it by Bible, right? It's very important that we recognize that we are engaged in a humanistic approach to intervention in child-centered play therapy. And so not every child is going to beautifully fit into each of those stages, but it is a great starting point to help us to navigate that therapeutic work. We're definitely helping ourselves to be able to recognize those markers by using this concept, to be able to hold steady to our approach, and to be able to have those responses ready to be able to respond to kids. So look, that is a very brief overview, you guys. Look, if you liked this content, please follow us on Instagram at the Play Therapy Circle podcast. Contact us, get in touch, share your feedback, drop us a comment on our Instagram posts, follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as well, and give us a review. We love to hear from you guys. If you want to hear more content along this topic, we would love to hear about that as well. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about the parent-therapist relationship. you guys. A really great topic as we move into talking about working with parents and what that involves. So I hope that will be useful for you guys too. I hope today has been useful. Thanks for sticking around and listening along. I hope wherever this finds you in the world that you are having a good day, that you're having a good week, and that you have a wonderful weekend. Be kind to each other and be kind to yourselves. We love our Play Therapy Circle community and we appreciate your support. Go well, look after yourselves and each other, and I will talk to you guys again soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.